20 years after the handover of Hong Kong to China, a new generation has come to transform the political landscape of the former British colony. Its aim is to force Beijing to keep its promises with regards to democracy, a David versus Goliath battle embodied by these young, recently elected MPs who must be sworn in, a precise protocol that is meticulously defined by the law.
本人朱凱迪謹以至誠據實聲明及確認，本人就任中華人民共和國香港特別行政區立法會議員，定當擁護中華人民共和國香港特別行政區基本法，效忠中華人民共和國香港特別行政區。我叫做朱凱迪。
My name is Eddie Chu, and I'm an MP.
香港嘅立法會議員。民主自決，暴政必亡。反對梁君彥做主席。
In the space of a few minutes, these young MPs transformed this official ceremony into a major political event.
I, Sixtus Leung Chung Hang, swear by the Almighty God that being a member of the Legislative Council of the
My name is Sixtus Leung. I'm one of the leaders of the Youngspiration Party.
I, Wai-Ching, solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare that and affirm that
My name is Wai-Ching. I'm 25 years old.
I will uphold the basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China, bear allegiance to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China.
游蕙禎議員，你嘅展示品令我對你是否了解立法會議員有合理嘅懷疑。我係冇權為你監誓。請下一位議員宣誓。
Nullified oaths broadcast live. By refusing to pledge allegiance to the People's Republic of China, these MPs instantly became the bête noire for Beijing and the icons for a whole new generation.
You can torture me. You can even destroy this body. But you will never imprison my mind.
My name is Nathan Law. I am 23 years old and I'm a student at Lignan University. I am Hong Kong's youngest MP.
權力歸於人民，暴政必亡，民主自決，抗爭到底。另外，我都想問陳宏安秘書長，你有咩資格去裁定上述3位議員，包括姚松炎、游蕙禎同埋梁頌恆，佢哋嘅宣誓係無效？根據邊一條議事規則，你係能夠阻止佢哋進行跟住落嚟嘅選舉？
羅冠聰議員宣誓儀式已經完畢。
議事規則第6條，秘書處有咩權力係去阻止議員係參與跟住落嚟嘅會議？陳宏安秘書長，我問你一句，佢哋3位到底能唔能夠參與跟住落嚟嘅主席選舉？
羅冠聰議員，請你翻返埋位。
我係唔會翻埋位，除非你處理埋呢個問題。我係以一個議員嘅身份向詢問你秘書。
For the first time, MPs openly demanded self-determination within the Parliament walls, and in so doing, touched on the taboo of independence, unspeakable words for Beijing, which would now use all its might to silence these discordant voices.
我哋先暫停一陣。
能唔能夠參與跟住落嚟嘅主席選舉？
梁君彥。
The election of these young rebels has unveiled an image of Hong Kong that is far removed from the one which is displayed along its famous bay. Because hiding behind this postcard scenery lies a highly unequal society in which Yau Wai-Ching has grown up, a city that is no longer British, but which isn't quite Chinese either. a city where 20% of Hong Kong citizens live below the poverty line. It is a city of harsh coexistence where individuals struggle to find their place. The dark future that they foretell is disrupting a society that currently has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, with under 25s only accounting for 13% of the population. And it is this youth that is now rejecting the diktat of the economic and financial elite, and who wants to take charge of its destiny and that of this city which devours everything, including space.
Rents are going up and up. It seems that we have placed our trust in the wrong people. Rents here are the most expensive in the world. You won't find these kind of high prices anywhere else in the world. Housing is a basic right, and yet here in Hong Kong, it has become a luxury. And so for us, the young people, we think that it is normal to live with our parents. And when our grandparents also live under the same roof, it all becomes far too cramped. If I had to describe the places where Hongkongers live, I would say they are like hamster cages. And this is a feeling that you have even when you're outside.
And how are developers making their fortunes these days? With apartments that are 14 square meters at 11,000 euros per square meter. The price is prohibitive. And so, with the great majority of Hong Kongers living in these overcrowded conditions where space is invaded and horizons are blocked out, Hong Kong's youth are forced to seek out oxygen to the profit of evening classes and trendy bars where they hang around until the early hours and cart around their frustrations.
In Hong Kong, human relationships are restricted. They are nothing more than platonic.
You're right, we don't dare to express our feelings anymore. We don't dare to say I love you.
Do you think that's why Hong Kongers experience real romance much later than in other countries?
Not necessarily, but they struggle to satisfy their desires.
I've heard that in some of the hotels in Kowloon Tong, people queue up to have sex. I've never been, but apparently they start queuing at about 11 p.m, hoping to get a room by 2 or 3 a.m. And by the time your turn comes around, you're no longer in the mood.
And this is henceforth a model of society that these post-retrocession children reject in order to assert their own way of living in a Hong Kong that they have shaped these past 20 years and that they consider to be the birth of a new identity.
During colonisation, we didn't feel as if we were British nor Chinese. But after the retrocession, the authorities tried to impose a kind of Sino-Hong Kongese hybrid identity. But they failed because the two cultures are just not compatible at all. We share linguistic features with China because Cantonese is one of the major Chinese languages. But we have added in a lot of words that have different sounds and forms, like the words bus or taxi, words that come from our British colonial history. It is a heritage that, of course, comes from this colonial past. But I am not British. I am not Chinese. I am Hongkongese.
You may deny the fact that you are Chinese, but you hold a Chinese Hong Kong passport. And when you go across the border, not to China, but go anywhere else, when you have to sign your immigration form, it says nationality there, and you have to write down Chinese. You can say Hong Kong. But I'm sure the immigration person, the guard, the immigration control people there will say, sorry, Hong Kong is not a country. What is your nationality? They will still write down Chinese again.
Well, that's up to them. If they feel they're not Chinese, they're not Chinese. I have no problem with it. Maybe the Chinese government's very upset. And then the Chinese government should ask itself why that these people don't feel Chinese anymore. And not too many years ago, they feel very Chinese. So what has happened? Is that we see all the interference from Beijing, all the very harsh language by Beijing officials and also by the Hong Kong government officials that turn them away. So, so it's for the government to examine itself. If people don't feel they are Chinese, you can't force them to. And I'm not going to force them to.
The agreement has been formally signed today in Beijing by Mrs. Thatcher in the presence of Mr. Deng Xiaoping himself.
To understand the origins of this identity renunciation and this cultural rejection, we need to go back to 1984, when the British and Chinese were sealing the future of the colony of Hong Kong in a document that served as an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The Retrocession calendar was now set in stone.
It was agreed that Hong Kong will be returned to China on the 1st of July 1997. But then the Joint Declaration also set out a list of conditions, and under which is Hong Kong is to be returned under the so-called one country, two system. It will become a special administrative region of China, but then it is given a high degree of autonomy, including independent legislative, executive and judicial powers, and also guarantees for protection of human rights under the two international covenants on human rights. So this was the joint declarations which was agreed in 1984, and it was provided that these guarantees, which is in an international treaty, will be written into a constitutional document, and that is the basic law which will form the Constitution of Hong Kong after 1997.
On the 1st of July 1997, the British Crown stepped down after a 155-year rule. The banks of Hong Kong, the only deep-water port in the region, were moving away for good from these conquerors who in 1842 had snatched it away from the aging Tianxia Empire at the end of the First Opium War. A drug which had degraded China and made Her Majesty's subjects rich. A total humiliation which was now being wiped away. On this historic day, Hong Kong's future for the next 50 years was at stake. By sowing the seeds of democracy, the British left its people with the task of harvesting its fruits. And while its former and new masters celebrated this change in sovereignty with great pomp, keeping the promises made in mind, there was still one question on everyone's lips. Would Hong Kong always remain Hong Kong? As the clock struck midnight, the countdown began.
In a few moments, the
United Kingdom's responsibilities will pass to the People's Republic of China. Hong Kong will thereby be restored to China, and, within the framework of one country, two systems, it will continue to have a strong identity of its own and be an important partner for many countries in the world.
The Chinese government will continue to apply the system of one country, two systems, and will grant a high degree of autonomy to Hong Kong, which will maintain the same social system and way of life that the country currently has.
These words were not enough to reassure the Democrats. Martin Lee, an historic figure from the hostile opposition to China since the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, voiced his concerns. Would China one day accord democracy and universal suffrage as promised?
We know, of course, that without a democratically constituted government and legislature, there is no way for our people to be assured that good laws will be passed to protect their freedoms.
An outstanding lawyer and a highly respected figure amongst the political intelligentsia, in 1982 Martin Lee took part in the composition of the first drafts of the Basic Law, which should have guaranteed that promises made were kept.
It's provided in the Basic Law that during the first 10 years after the handover, that is the first 10 years from 1997 until 2007, we would not be given full democracy or universal suffrage. But after the 10 years, starting from 2007, we can have it. Now, so we're waiting for that time, all right? Because it's now more than 10 years. But unfortunately, Beijing kept on postponing it. Although the Basic Law makes it very clear that the ultimate aim is to have universal suffrage both for the election of the chief executive as well as for every legislator.
Whilst the 7 million Hong Kongers packed into their 1,000 square kilometres sat waiting for the universal suffrage that they had been promised, these young localists decided to defy time and not to remain at the mercy of Beijing's goodwill any longer. And despite their young age, they proposed a 180-degree about turn to voters, far removed from the policies pursued by their pan-democratic elders. By setting its heart on these children of the Retrocession generation, Hong Kong has voted for change. At 23 years old, Nathan Law is now the embodiment of this political shift. With Demo Sisto, the centre-left party that he co-founded in April 2016, he established a political startup in which passion and commitment compensate for an experience. Along with his colleagues who are barely more than teenagers themselves, Nathan Law is putting the strategy of the localists in place. Because in a few weeks' time, the Hong Kongers will be electing their new chief executive. A first for these newcomers.
My position is simple. If you think that it's better to vote for the pro-establishment and choose the least bad out of the candidates, then vote for John Sang. If not, then you should spoil your ballot paper.
The election of these young rebels has certainly thrown a spanner in the works of the two large traditional parties who have run against each other for the past 20 years, in a parliamentary assembly made up of 70 MPs, 35 of whom are elected by universal suffrage and the other half by an electoral college. On one side, there is a pro-Beijing camp with 40 seats who are conservative and advocates of stability. On the other, there are the pan-democrats with 23 seats ranging from centre to left, supporters of dialogue and compromise with Beijing. And opposing them, there are now 7 localists with a new political force that is more radical and nationalist and who no longer see China as a mother country but as a new occupying power, a voice of which Nathan Law is the echo.
We wanted to amplify the voice of young people here within the LegCo, the Legislative Council. And to do so, we needed to have a political party. A stable political representation to bring the questions on Hong Kong's future to the table. Something that the other political parties are no longer able to accomplish.
It's necessary to have new generation join into the democracy movement to fight for our future. Hong Kong is the city that we born, we live, and we love. I born a year before the handover, and it's time for our generation to get back the future of our city. And that's the reason for us to found Demo Sisto to advocate Hong Kong people deserve the right to determine our sovereignty and constitution.
Joshua Wong, His face is known around the world, making the front page of the major international newspapers. At 19 years old, he is one of the leading figures in the fight for democracy in Hong Kong.
Hello, you can find out the news about the flooding problem in the metro station. Hello, take this leaflet with information about the flooding problem.
Too young to stand in the legislative elections, he is patiently waiting for his time to come by doing what he has always done, keeping himself in the public eye. In 2011, with a handful of activists who were barely 14 years old, he launched the movement Scholarism, which was opposed to the introduction of a patriotic educational class in the school curriculum that was designed to glorify China. It was here that Joshua Wong's leadership qualities became apparent.
National education forced the student agree to the Communist Party, CCP. We think it connect a lot of problem. It's a brainwash education, control the independent thinking of students.
We didn't agree with the program, which was nothing more than propaganda. So we decided to oppose it.
In Beijing's desired program, there would be no mention of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre and no reference at all to the vagaries of Maoism.
In the course's summary, it said that the Communist Party is an organisation that guides, unites, and develops China. There was also a chapter within this summary on the evaluation of teachers to find out their degree of love and passion for China. We distributed leaflets and organised protests, and that's how people came to understand our opposition to the programme. In summer 2012, on the eve of the programme's inauguration, we gathered together 120,000 people to take part in a protest. 1 month later, the government announced that the programme had been withdrawn.
The initial elation of these youngsters' triumph quickly gave way to suspicion. Beijing had revealed its true intentions to tighten its grip over Hong Kong. Three years later, Beijing announced an electoral reform which would drop like a bombshell. There would be no universal suffrage for the next chief executive elections in March 2017, contrary to the promise made, and candidates would receive prior approval by China. The people of Hong Kong saw their dream of total democracy slipping away. C.Y. Leung, the chief executive, was a spokesperson for Beijing and delivered a very clear message.
I appeal to members of the pan-democratic camp not to mislead the Hong Kong people any further into thinking that democratic aspirations in Hong Kong, particularly amongst their followers, could be satisfied or accomplished by ignoring provisions of the Basic Law and decisions of the NPCSC.
On the 28th of September 2014, the Umbrella Revolution had just begun. Within a few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers were defying those in power.
Some of the protesters use an umbrella to protect themselves from the pepper spray. The umbrella as a symbol representing non-violence.
To the left of Joshua Wong is Benny Tai, a law professor and civil disobedience theorist who became the spiritual father of this generation which intends to take back what Beijing has stolen from them.
We occupy the central district, that's the central business district, in a way to indicate that we want Hong Kong not just about money making. We want Hong Kong to a place also of justice, of fairness, and therefore we choose that place to occupy.
I was only 17 years old when the Umbrella movement started up. I was involved in its planning, and my role within the movement was to manage the media and win the support of the people of Hong Kong.
去策劃行動啦，面對傳媒啊，甚至係繼續去爭取社會認同嘅一個重要角色。
I've been arrested several times and undergone various political trials.
同埋上庭嘅政治檢控。
After weeks of occupation and confrontation, arrests and convictions for illegal protests multiplied. The movement broke down. Beijing had won the fight, and the Democrats had achieved nothing.
After the 79 days of occupation, actually Hong Kong's economy, went down quite a bit. We can see that from China. We are just, the front gate of China. China has been persistently getting 6.5 to 7% growth. Hong Kong has gone down to 3.5 and even less. Now, this happened in the last 2 years after the occupation movement. Do you think there is an effect on us? Yes, there is. So it is not just idle fear or anything. It is true.
If we look at the movement's effectiveness in responding to our demands for political reform, one can say that it failed. But we succeeded in bringing about a political renaissance for Hong Kong, and we initiated social disobedience by inciting more and more Hong Kongers to throw themselves into social movements. This movement has left behind a heritage which has served to enrich the pro-democracy movement. So, although we may have lost a battle, the war isn't over yet by any means. And so that means we have to learn the lessons from this failure in order to carry on our fight.
The
vast majority of people support universal suffrage. The vast majority of people agree with democracy, right? It is the form of democracy that is in contention here. So there are debates about it, right? China says we're not going the Western democratic way, we are going to develop our own way, so well, we look at what it is.
We have always been prepared to work under the one country, two systems policy, but Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy. And if we can't even choose our own leaders ourselves, how can we have high degree of autonomy?
Nathan Law leads his fight at a social level in an environment that has been able to modernize itself, but which still remains entrenched in its traditions. Nathan Law is trying to break down barriers and occupy the voids left by the old Democrats, to venture into territory that raises the hackles of the most conservative pro-Beijingers. Bucking the stuffy stereotype of the MP in a suit and tie, Nathan Law is young, and this MP is proud of who he is. This is what he has come to explain this morning in front of an audience of businessmen and women and LGBTQ activists.
Right next to me. The point is that for now, the local legislations of anti-discrimination on different sexualities is still not yet done in Hong Kong. I think that would be a big big target or big goal for us, especially for the younger generation in the Legislative Council to achieve that.
Nathan Law is satisfied because today he's the politician whom they have all come to listen to. It is he who, with Demo Sisto, has without a doubt the political platform that is the most in touch with today's society.
I'm with Nathan Law, co-founder of political party Demo Sisto and Hong Kong's youngest ever legislative council. What advice will you give millennials who want to be catalysts of change?
Well, definitely do not look down yourself. Before I got elected, people consider that I'm immature or not unable to talk about policies. But after the election, I proved to a lot of people that I'm able to do it, and so do you. So all the millennial and all the youngsters, do not look down yourself. You have the ability to change the society, and it starts with your life. talk with the people that don't understand about LGBT, talk about those people who have bias on them, and prove that all we want is a fair and equal society, and we want respect to each other and from everyone.
Thank you so much. It was really cool to meet you. Actually, Greg, can you get a photo of us? My team would love it.
Sure.
Thanks.
And to succeed, Nathan Law and the young localists have had to turn their back on the old pan-democratic movements who are now in the hot seat. Accused of belonging to the establishment, over time they would have given up on the day-to-day concerns of the Hong Kong people in favour of a battle they would never have won. That of establishing democracy in China, a pipe dream that is out of step with today's youth.
以前大家都好相信泛民，覺得佢哋幫我哋爭取民主，甚至
At the time, everyone believed in the democratic camp because it was fighting for democracy in
即
China,
係呢啲普世價值，大家都
and they weren't wrong to do so.
但係慢慢會反思。
But when we look around us, we no longer recognize Hong Kong, and so, inevitably, we ask ourselves exactly what the Democrats have done.
完全兩回事嘅時候，就會諗話究竟呢一班人咁多年以嚟做過啲乜嘢，為香港爭取咗啲乜嘢。
In the last 20, 30 years, the people who have fought for Hong Kong, for civil liberties, for the rule of law, have not failed. We have done a lot. We haven't got democracy, that is true. But we have managed to help to preserve the people's freedoms and still have the rule of law. This is as a result of the collective effort of people in the last few decades. I can quite safely say that without that, Hong Kong will not be like this today. I will probably not be allowed to be interviewed by you.
所以呢個人咧就係中央干預，我唔中意簡真正，經常有同呢啲人唔係林鄭月娥嘅人，佢離西環越嚟越遠。
Ah, she's not supporting him anymore.
8 days away from the elections for the next chief executive, it's all go in the offices of Demo Sisto on the 9th floor of Parliament. Nathan Law and his colleagues, with their air of hip teenagers, need to decide on their voting instructions. Which candidates should they choose and which alliances should they make? For the first time, Nathan Law will come up against an electoral system that was defined in 2014 when Beijing imposed its reform. A system that is considered to be the most complex in the world and which he must perfectly master. He doesn't have much choice. The bill submitted by Beijing is far from holding the promise of change. In the running are Carrie Lam, Beijing's favourite and former First Secretary of the Administration. John Tsang, great servant of the state, former Secretary of Finance and pro-Beijing, and Wu Kwok-hing, a retired former judge who is also pro-Beijing. 3 candidates who aren't decided between by the 3,800,000 voters, but by just a section of them. The 1,200 happy few members of the Hong Kong elite, the majority of whom are pro-establishment, who are known as the Inner Circle. It is they who will appoint the new chief executive. 1,200 privileged people who come from industry, business and finance with occupational fields ranging from fishermen to architects, from trade unions, social and religious organisations, without forgetting the 70 LegCo or Legislative Council MPs. With such a system in place, Hong Kong is the only place in the world where a bank can vote, whilst its employees are denied this right. In any case, at the end of the day, it's always Beijing that wins. A fatality the Demo Sisto refuses to accept. Its position is clear: we won't sell our soul to the devil. Because in the democratic camp, there are increasing divisions caused by classic scenarios, the young against the old and supporters of compromise against those who want radical change.
Some Democrats, they decided to vote for Zhong Zhen, who is a pro-establishment candidate, who has still not yet given any promise on universal suffrage and 4th of June massacre, things like this. They decided to vote for him because he's the lesser evil, but I'm still not convinced that it is the right strategy. They want to have a more mild and a chief executive to be more communicative, try to solve the conflicts in society. But I have serious doubts in this strategy because I think for now it is very dangerous for pro-democracy, especially a legislator, to endorse, to put your political endorsement on a pro-establishment candidate who will not lead the democratic movement in the future.
I'm totally against the strategy of the pan-democrats because once you show your support for the lesser evil, that means you will be killed because it's like a commit suicide politically.
Beijing's bête noire since he supported the Chinese students in 1989. Long hair is a pan-democrat, but is on the fringes of his camp. At 60 years old, this Guevarist has even become the inspiration for young localists. Together, they are striving to overturn this repressive electoral reform by all legal means. In effect, each candidate for the Supreme election needs to obtain the support of at least 600 members of the inner circle. But with only 325 seats, the Democrats can't put forward a candidate. And so Long Hair and Eddie Chu turn to their fellow Hongkongers to seek out supporting votes.
The campaign began a few months ago already. Have you been asked for your opinion? Why hasn't anyone asked you? Have you ever seen John Sang? Have you ever seen Wu Kwok-hing? Have you ever seen Carrie Lam come and ask you your opinion? No. And why? Because they don't dare to.
An approach that is authorized under Hong Kong law, which must allow Long Hair to free himself from the designation of the inner circle. To be appointed, he needs 38,000 signatures. He will only receive 21,000. A failure for localism, which remains a victim for a society that's nostalgic for a thriving Hong Kong, for the maiding Hong Kong, and for prosperity that when business is okay, everything is okay, and a time when almost nobody cared about politics.
Hong Kong become a casino. What happened in Hong Kong is a casino economy. Hong Kong become a very prominent financial center in a global scale. So what happened here is that the Chinese side want to control Hong Kong and use it to become a financial center for the capital, the Chinese capital, to emerge to the other part of the world. And it makes Hong Kong different place because high inflation, high inflation, and the gap between the rich and poor become more and more significant.
And to control Hong Kong, Beijing is constantly intervening in local matters, provoking a reaction that has come to be known as Hong Kongism, a combination of nationalism and patriotism. A hostile reaction to what the local people perceive as an invasion when faced with a massive influx of Chinese businessmen and tourists with a very different culture who speak a completely different language. And if some see this as a new form of colonization, it's because Beijing dictates its priorities to fight against localism and impose its hegemony. And that's what makes people afraid, because as set out in the Basic Law in 2047, the formula one country, two systems will become null and void if it isn't renewed, and Hong Kong will be nothing more than a Chinese city. It is this fateful date that has inspired Inca Lung, a 25-year-old filmmaker, in his science fiction short film called Local Egg. What will become of Hong Kong in 10 years' time under the ideological and economical rule of China?
I而家違咩規啊？
長官話：逢係見到呢張名單上面寫咗嘅字，都要影低佢。
賣蛋都犯法。
賣蛋冇問題，係本地兩個字犯規。
咁我問你啦， 本地即係邊度？
香港咯。
咁本地蛋即係邊度嘅蛋？
香港咯。
如果我寫香港蛋，有冇問題咧？
香港冇問題啊。
同一隻蛋，寫本地蛋就有問題，寫香港蛋就冇問題。講唔講邏輯㗎？
成個故仔其實
This is all just a made-up story.
所以
But it is also something to set the alarm bells ringing.
一種提醒，即係去雖然係講一個未來嘅10年，但係
It also shows that the decisions made by one generation inevitably affect the generation that follows it.
我哋呢一代，而我哋呢一代有冇一啲決定係會影響緊下一代咧？自己覺得就好睇呢10年或者20年嘅中國成。
Everything depends on the political changes that will occur in China in the next 10 or 20 years.
即係一個願意改革。
It is hard to say if the country will move towards democracy or if it will retreat and lock itself into its autocracy.
A Chinese autocracy of which some of the young MPs are already bearing the brunt. 1 month after her refusal to pledge allegiance to People's Republic of China during her swearing in front of the parliamentarians, Wai-Ching was invalidated by the judges. But not just by any judges, because to put an end to any ideas of independence, Beijing didn't hesitate to flex its muscles by meddling in Hong Kong's internal affairs. By interpreting and applying the basic law for the 5th time since retrocession, China bypassed the local justice system and Wai-Ching consequently lost her seat in parliament.
I want to highlight the fact that myself and Sixtus Lung were chosen by the voters in the September elections, with 20,643 votes for me and more than 30,000 for Sixtus. If the tribunal uses this method to disqualify us, I think that it's clear to everyone what kind of society we are living in.
China came out very strongly with the 2 legislators who insult China in their oath-taking and also put up that banner saying Hong Kong is not China, and they see it as this is advocating independence. This is not acceptable. And something has to be done about it. I think the Hong Kong government sensed that, and the Hong Kong government decided to take out legal proceedings to say that, well, these 2 legislators have not done the oath, and instead by what they have done, they refuse to take the oath, and therefore they are disqualified. And the government take out judicial proceedings to disqualify the 2 persons. And after the submissions have been done and the judgment was reserved, and the judge is considering his judgment, over the weekend, the NPC Standing Committee made the 5th interpretation, which to me, I think that is by far the most controversial interpretation. And that highlights how undesirable the NPCSC is when they make an interpretation in the middle of a trial. It clearly interferes with the judicial process.
And affirm that being a member of the Legislative Council of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's
People voted for us because they share the same political view as us. They voted for us because we are offering something different. We've done something that no other MP would have dared to do previously. Everyone knew that we were going to do something during our swearing in. This invalidation is a first in the world. It is the first time that a representative who is legally elected by the people is disqualified by a democratic government. It's totally ridiculous.
There are now some people, very few people, asking for independence, but they are not doing anything about it. You know? If you want independence, and China says no, either you give up, or you have started civil war. You have to start revolution. But you don't want to use independence to ask Hong Kong people to elect you into the Legislative Council. If you want a revolution, you don't want this government. You don't want this legislature. You want to turn it upside down. If you talk about independence of Hong Kong today, you want to break the cage? How do you break the cage without being successful in having a revolution. Right? That's the only way. I can't think of any other way.
The localists, who took their oath without affirming their good faith, are now in China's line of fire. Long Hair, Nathan Law, and Eddie Chu could well lose their seats if the judges decide to follow Beijing's recommendations.
It's time to start now. Can you guys see the PowerPoint slide?
Based in the offices of Demo Sisto inside Parliament, Joshua Wong wants to take this fight to an international stage. It is 6 p.m. in Hong Kong and midday in France. In front of him are the students of Sebastian, an English teacher in Tulle in the Corrèze region.
I would just try to share my story now.
I just remind you that they are ESL students, so if you can speak a bit.
Okay, sorry, I'll speak slowly. Okay, sorry about it. In the recent development of the democracy movement in Hong Kong, what we face is also the abuse of constitutional power of China government. Today, they have banned the pro-independence parties, and tomorrow they could ban those supporting self-determination. And one day they can ban anyone who calls for universal suffrage and democracy in Hong Kong or China. So, while Beijing blocked pro-independence, pro-self-determination, and pro-democracy lawmaker to take office, it already proved that one country, two system is continually being eroded by the interference of China government. And that's why we always claim that there will be a threat of China around Hong Kong, Taiwan, and even in whole of the East Asia or around the world.
During the course of 20 minutes, Joshua Wong explains the key milestones for the fight for democracy in Hong Kong since retrocession. From scholarism through to the threats that hang over the heads of the localists, everything is explained down to the smallest detail.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you. Okay, just we'll start on the questions, okay? Okay. Opinions first.
Discussion begins, but what seems to interest the Tulle students the most isn't the political career of Joshua, but the personality of this young man who was barely older than them.
Hi, Joshua. With your busy life, do you have time for a social life?
Being a student activist and being one of our iconic representative of democracy movement in Hong Kong, sometimes it's need to sacrifice. Just like it's easy to be recognized on street, and until 8 p.m. in the evening, usually I should go back home and to have dinner with my family. But now I'm still having a having a conference call to share my experience and my journey in social movement. But I would say that if the things that I involve or organize is valuable, I think it's still worth for me continue to fight. Yeah.
D-Day has arrived. For the 7th time since retrocession, Hong Kong is getting ready to choose its next chief executive. The 1,200 members of the Inner Circle, which Long Hair, Eddie Chu and Nathan Law belong to as MPs, are preparing to vote. The time has come for rallies and predictions.
In 4 hours, Carrie Lam might have been selected. Do you think anything changes July 1st when she becomes chief executive?
Well, definitely, if you appoint a candidate that is not favored by people, then the rebounds must be larger. So I think there will be massive protests on 1st of July.
Gathered in front of the city's largest business centre, which has been transformed into a polling station for the occasion, members of civil society, citizens and students have come to support the group of localists. The police warn that this rally is illegal.
My name is Leung Kwok Hung. I am an MP. Are you a thug or a policeman? Will you let me through or not?
Now on to the Electoral Committee, where the members of the inner circle have come together to decide who will run Hong Kong for the next 5 years. Who will be the winner amongst the 3 candidates chosen by Beijing? In less than an hour, the ballot boxes are filled with 1,200 ballot papers.
It will not take long for the officials and the returning officer to count the votes. I think it's the shortest vote counting on this earth.
I voted a blank vote because that's a protest to this small circle selection, and actually we call it election.
By spoiling their ballot paper, the localists have provided a reminder of the founding principles of their fight, reaffirmed their desire for self-determination, and set in stone the future of their opposition to Beijing, despite the threats that hang over them.
Nathan Law, Eddie Chu and I, we don't even know if we will still be MPs next month. That is why the poem says, even when the flowers die, when they fall on the ground, they provide nourishment for new flowers.
Thank you, Longhair. Now it's time for me to announce the definitive results. Carrie Lam has won with 783 votes.
Carrie Lam, the favourite, wins hands down in an election that was a foregone conclusion.
Why the Beijing government may not want Hong Kong to have election? Hong Kong has been a place where new ideas was born, and new ideas would influence the development of China. I think that's why China worry about the democratic development of Hong Kong.
I think some of them in Beijing, or maybe many in Beijing, feel that giving you universal suffrage is like giving you independence, which of course is wrong, but somehow they've talked themselves into thinking that that's the case. Because then if you have your own government, you may be out of control. And Beijing wants to control. So it will be a never-ending struggle.
By defying China and the most powerful communist party in the world, these Democrats have become the symbols of a youth grasping for freedom in a world turned upside down, where authoritarianism advances relentlessly. Pop star Anthony Wong brings home this message on the stage of the Colosseum in front of a captivated audience. No, Hong Kongese democracy cannot be dissolved into Chinese absolutism.
Lots of things have happened these last 20 years. And without a doubt, they are some of the most important events that Hong Kong has ever experienced. What has become of our city? Can we still live happily in Hong Kong? Some want to get rid of us, to make us disappear. But I'm telling you that we won't let that happen. They are not going to make us disappear, and they won't make this city disappear. It won't be as easy as that.
No one really knows what happened. And I think even among the senior Chinese leaders, they don't know what is going to happen in 2047. One thing for sure, most of us now will not live till 2047, or at least those who are making decisions today. It will be the current young people who will really be deciding the fate. They will be the people in the 2030s, successful professionals, successful people, young people who tell what sort of future we want. And the downside, the mixed feeling is, yes, they are very young, they are immature, and some of these people may be too anxious to reach the goal.
But I think for those who will be here, the thing to do is to try to start the negotiation with Beijing. But you have to have a climate where both sides are ready to negotiate. Both sides can trust each other. Both sides are in the mood. If one side does not want to talk, how can you negotiate? You can't negotiate with yourself. So we have to understand that. And nobody is in a position to point a gun at Beijing's head and say, you do it. You can't. So you have to negotiate.
Post-90 or what they call in Hong Kong, who were born around the period of Handover, I call them angels because they can fly, they got hopes. They're innocent, they're pure. But I wish them to make good use of their own pair of wings.
And whilst their minds turn to the 1 million Hong Kongers who 20 years ago took off towards other horizons, frightened by the change of sovereignty, they can also be pleased with themselves to have found with this retrocession generation the strength to remain, because no one seems to fear this emperor in Beijing anymore who appears to have no clothes.